It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to day 3 of the virtual CBIE 2020 conference. I would like to recognize and thank IDP Connect for supporting today's panel. Without the support of companies like IDP Connect, we would not be able to offer such a rich program. At this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today's panel, Advancing the Goals of Sustainable Development Through Internationalization, Stephen Lewis, a celebrated humanitarian and former UN Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa. Stephen Lewis is an outspoken and respected humanitarian who has worked to improve the human condition, both at home and abroad. He is a companion of the Order of Canada and holds 42 honorary degrees, including 39 from CBIE Canadian member institutions. Mr. Lewis started his career as a member of the Ontario Legislative Assembly. During his time in politics, he became leader of the Ontario New Democratic Party and leader of the official opposition. Stephen Lewis has served as Canada's ambassador to the United Nations from 1984 to 1988 and deputy executive director of UNICEF at the organization's global headquarters in New York from 1995 to 1999. Stephen was the UN Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa from 2001 to the end of 2006, and currently serves as the co-chair of the board of the Stephen Lewis Foundation and co-director of the international advocacy organization AIDS Free World. Stephen is certainly someone very familiar to all of us who are invested in the sustainable development endeavor, and it brings me great pleasure to open it up and pass the word to you, Stephen. We look forward to hearing your thoughts today. Please, Stephen.
You're very kind, Larissa, and thank you for an extravagant introduction. I imagine there was some tittering, which I cannot discern, that occurred at the mention of the honorary degrees. So simply let me begin with a confessional. I never graduated, so I've spent my entire adult life shamelessly lusting after honorary degrees, which you can see I have lavishly accumulated. Let me begin, if I may, with thanks for the opportunity to open this panel. It's quite a privilege. I enjoy addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to start, if I may, with 2 disclaimers. First, I am frankly not an expert in these areas. I am an observer. I have taught at various universities, but I have no academic credentials whatsoever. So please forgive me if there are a number of lacunae in my remarks. Secondly, I'm coming at the subject matter in somewhat unorthodox fashion. It won't be the usual trifecta of research and stewardship and service. I want to deal with it, giving voice to personal idiosyncratic views. I've read most of the material that was sent to me. I listened to the webinar. I remember that one speaker pointed out that in all of the array of material, the vast panorama of material around the Sustainable Development Goals, universities were only mentioned twice. And I think that's indicative of the job that the universities have ahead if they're going to make the role they have around the goals tangible and important. It seems to me that the universities should play and will want to play a profound role in the post-pandemic world. So my suggestion, which may be presumptuous, but I hold it strongly, is that you choose 3 or 4 or 5 of the 17 goals, which isn't to diminish by any means all the others. They can still be pursued, but choose 3 or 4 or 5 and concentrate your intellectual prowess and advocacy on those goals so that the relevance of the universities is palpable for anyone who witnesses it. So what are the goals that might be chosen? Forgive me, this is arbitrary. Others might choose otherwise. Poverty and hunger linked together, global health for all, which is goal number 3, as you know, of course, gender equality, the reduction of inequality, and climate. Those are the 5 areas that I would suggest that the universities take on as a kind of biblical gospel to help in the transformation of the international community. For this historical moment, those seem to me to be the imperatives. And if the universities take the issues forward, you'll not only enhance the relevance of the universities, but you will enhance the legitimacy of the goals themselves. Every single approach should be used, from research to international collaboration, to public statements, to use of the students, to, above all, the advocacy, the voice of the university community, both individual and collective, speaking out without timidity. I think that's pretty important. There's simply too much at stake for us to be equivocal in any way. We are at a transformative moment internationally and maybe in human history, and the universities must be central to that. So very quickly, on poverty and hunger, for example, we desperately need to make sure that the world understands that the donor community, the rich world, has been entirely deficient, negligent, defunct in areas of official development assistance. Only the Nordics and one or two others have reached the 0.7 of GNP, which has been suggested as far back as 1970. Similarly, the debt and the payment of interest on the debt, which saddles the South with such an inordinate burden and leaves them with very little financial flexibility to do important things in life. And the consequence is a tremendous swath of poverty, leading, of course, to hunger, which we're all familiar with. And the indignation and the fervor of anger around what we're doing to the low-income countries of the world is something that the university should be both documenting and expressing in no uncertain terms, including, I may say, having the courage to take on the political leadership, which is often so corrupt as to amass a fortune at the expense of the population itself. Good health for all, which is the second major area I'd focus in on, it seems to me to be the centerpiece of the next several years as a result of the coronavirus. And you don't have to have a school of public health to make pronouncements on the key issues that are emerging. And one of the key issues which has emerged with the coronavirus, of course, is to show the criminal disparity between North and South in dealing with so many of the infectious diseases. But there's also the question of the promotion of universal health care, which has now finally become a cause which is more widely embraced. It's also supporting a global public health convention, which will deal with access to medicine, but also deal with the way in which the pharmaceutical industry manipulates patents and prices. I mean, there comes a point in time, surely, where voices have to be asserted in defense of the vulnerable. And one of those voices in the broadest terms can be the university network. And as you see, the universities are barely mentioned in a discussion of the targets, in a discussion of the minutiae around the SDGs, because the universities have not been seen to be a part of these issues, crazily enough. Their means within global health, we still need a focus on HIV and TB, because after COVID, those infectious diseases are in terrible trouble. We desperately needed additional resources, as the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria has demonstrated. We need voices on vaccine development. This vaccine nationalism is grotesque in its absurdity, with all of the rich countries amassing hundreds of millions of doses of Pfizer and Moderna in advance contracts. And nobody is talking about the needs in the developing world. It may be that a continent like Africa, for example, has done better in dealing with the pandemic for a variety of reasons. But as the second wave hits, the numbers are increasing. By the end of this year, there'll be over 2 million cases in Africa, over 50,000 deaths. It's an appalling commentary on the absence of support from the rest of the world. And I think that it's obvious that in the broad global health system, that can be done. This is an agenda of global health that the universities can take and run with wherever they would want to put the emphasis. Number 3, gender equality. In my view, it is the single most difficult of so many of the issues we've been fighting so long. And perhaps the time has come finally, with the movements that have emerged in the last while, that gender equality can be talked of. But remember, even in an area like HIV, our colleague from South Africa will know this so well, 4,500 young women and girls between the ages of 15 and 24 are still getting infected every single week. And the tremendous gender inequality that has been compounded by the coronavirus when you look at sexual and reproductive health, when you look at child marriage, when above all you look at sexual violence, both domestic and beyond. These are issues which need more and more public advocacy. And it is quite simple, I think, to document what is happening and to build a dossier and a chronicle of indictment of the inequality around gender that will make it possible to consider progress. So collaboration with universities, particularly in the South, for some of the Northern universities, makes sense. Then the fourth area of reduction of inequality generally, and that's a tremendous challenge because as we emerge from the coronavirus, more and more people are talking about a new world order. And this isn't some kind of gratuitous phrase, which is vapid and vacuous and insubstantial. We're moving towards a reconfiguration of society. Of that, there's no question. Whether the capitalism of yore will continue unblemished or untarnished is very much at issue. So it's terribly important to overcome the disparities we've seen in inequality in the response to COVID-19. It's desperately important to counter the racism which infects the world so broadly. In Canada, of course, it's not only the racialized communities, it's also the very profound racism directed towards Indigenous communities. We have to overcome the discrimination and isolation directed against the marginalized groups, whether it ranges from domestic workers to frontline workers who we've now celebrated so extravagantly and appropriately in the response to the coronavirus. And when you think of the kind of financial and economic indicators that an outfit like Oxfam disgorges, where they point out that 8 people in the world hold as much wealth as 4.5 billion people, then you have a kind of ethos, you have an issue around which universities who document and analyze and put the material together because it's out there, but it's the voice that's required with the collaboration and the intersectional collaboration of which so many have talked. It's perfect fodder for university pronouncements. And finally, climate. I must say that I'm apocalyptic about climate. I've taught it, I've read a lot about it. I'm familiar with the details, as many people on the panel are undoubtedly familiar with the details. But I do want to say this. What's happening with climate will eclipse the worst of the coronavirus. And I mean the worst of the economic lockdowns, because the peril that climate presents to the world is incalculable. And the fact that we knew everything that should be done as far back as the first International Conference on Climate Change in 1988, which followed Gro Brundtland's book on our common future, and the 1992 conference in Rio. And then we graduate all these years through to Paris, where the targets are a kind of evidence of travesty, where none of the targets are adequate to deal with what is happening to the world as carbon is discharged. I look at my children and grandchildren, particularly grandchildren, and I feel a depth of anxiety that is acute beyond expression. And it's desperately necessary for leadership to be shown. And this is perfect for the universities. You have capacity to document approaches. I noticed this morning, I talk again to our colleague from the University of Cape Town, I'm a daily reader of the Maverick and of the Mail and Guardian. And I noticed that the Maverick just today was talking how the University of Cape Town had discovered a particular response to climate change, which may not work or may work, involving the discharge of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, but it is indicative of the kind of role that universities can play as they give voice to the research that they're doing. And we're going to have incalculable numbers of environmental refugees, which will greatly exceed the refugees we now see in conflict areas. And what in God's name will the world do to handle that? So in my dotage, because I'm clearly in my dotage, one of the geriatric group, I want to say that at this moment in time, climate change eclipses absolutely everything else. And we're in a moment of tremendous risk and peril. And if the universities can concentrate on giving leadership to the world on this issue, it would be superb. I know I have only a couple of minutes left, so I will deal with them this way. That, for me, is a broad agenda for internationalizing the sustainable development goals. I would not try to do them all. I would take some of them and ram them home relentlessly, but it needs leadership. And the leadership can come from the university community, not just with rhetorical flourishes, but with absolute determination to influence the policymakers and the often somnambulant politicians when it comes to these issues. And I point out that the Sustainable Development Goals flow from the United Nations. So the degree to which the goals are supported, you're supporting multilateralism in the face of a diminution of support for multilateralism and the emergence of the authoritarians around the world, from Hungary to India, from Myanmar to Brazil. The authoritarian impulses have to be confronted. I think the secret weapon in all of this is the students. I had the tremendous privilege, I loved it. It's in some ways some of the most gratifying moments of my life in teaching at McMaster University, at McGill University, and at Ryerson University. And I realized in the process, because I was teaching international development in all instances, that the zeal that infects, that suffuses the minds and capacities of young people, the wish to be global citizens, the wish to improve the world is most extraordinary. It's irresistible in its impact. And it means that the universities have this vast array of individuals and collectivities that can make an impact, much the way Greta Thunberg has made an impact with all the other young students on the climate issue. I beg you, when you make all these points and take on the curmudgeons and the Philistines and those who will not see that the world has hope if only they change it, I beg you not to be timid. Just one personal anecdote and I'll end. Many of you will know the name David Suzuki, who is Canada's environmental icon. And I was privileged enough to do a cross-country tour with David just during our federal election in 2019, discussing climate change at universities. We spoke together at 5 major universities. And it was astonishing to us to find that in 4 of the 5 universities, they would not have their name associated with the place where we convened on their campus, with the auditorium on their campus. They did not want the university's name to be seen to be part of the Suzuki tour, because they felt that climate change was controversial. And if you're going to have that kind of timidity, that kind of absurd elementary tentativeness, then it ain't going to work. Universities have to be bold, courageous, unequivocal, ready to take on the world, because in taking on the world with the SDGs, there is the real prospect for change. Thanks, Larissa.
Oh, Stephen, thank you for that call to action. And we really look forward to continuing this conversation, because I think your point around voices needing to be asserted on behalf of the vulnerable hits home for all of us in this international education endeavor. And when we think about the potential that exists, as you've so eloquently touched on, in our institutions from coast to coast to coast, there's just such a critical role for our institutions to be playing. And I'm so delighted that we have the space today at this conference to be able to explore that. I can't thank you enough for that call to action and those words. I mean, calling us really not to be timid and to be bold and courageous and unequivocal in how we move forward as institutions and as a sector. because I think there's a lot that can be accomplished through action. So a very heartfelt thank you. And we look forward to extending the invitation to you to continue this conversation with us. I think over the last number of years, we've seen our institutions begin to take concrete steps about that intentionality and that action. And I think we're really excited to have the space of today's plenary to explore what that looks like. And how we in fact operationalize that and bring that into action, not only on our individual campuses, but together as a Canadian community of institutions who, I agree with you, I think have a very significant role to play in addressing that criminal disparity that you spoke about between the North and the South. So with that, I would like to invite the rest of our colleagues to turn on their cameras and their microphones. And let us just jump into conversation and make use of this really precious time we have together today. So Janica Rowanpura, who will be our moderator for the session, as well as our colleagues, both Canadian and international, Joy Johnson. We have Santa Ohno, Mamoketi Faking from South Africa. We have Angel Cabrera from the Georgia Institute of Technology and Don Burrows from Nova Scotia Community College. We're grateful to have all of you with us today. And with that, I turn the word over to you, Santa, to you, Janica, to launch us into the continuation of the conversation. Thank you again, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I know that lots of delegates are joining from other places as well. So thank you again, Larissa, for inviting me to moderate this panel on advancing the goals of sustainable development through internationalization. And thanks for the keynote, Stephen, and I know Larissa highlighted a few things, but I also want to say that you highlighting a few critical SDG areas and the challenges during this post-pandemic. I was actually planning to have some briefing remarks and posing some challenges, but I think with Stephen's keynote and also to respect the time, I'm not going to go through that and simply I would jump into the questions, but because we are very, very fortunate to have such an experienced and high profile and high level panel joining us today. I have no idea why Larissa put me in trouble by asking me to moderate this panel. So I'm going to ask them questions individually and about the experience and engagement with the SDGs. And then we will have some open questions actually we are also watching some questions from the chat as well. As Larissa mentioned that I'm not going to kill the time by introducing the panelists with their bios because if I do that I'll probably take about another 10 to 15 minutes. So with that, I'm going to start my first question with Dr. Mamoketi Pakeng, is the Vice Chancellor at University of Cape Town. Good evening to you, Mamoketi, and I want to actually say that because your background as member of the board of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research and chaired its Research Development and Innovation Committee and all the other great work that you have done, with your lots of experience with international research collaborations, particularly related to SDGs. Please share with us how have these collaborations supported South Africa and the African region?
Thanks very much, Dr. Janaka. Let me start by saying for us in South Africa, social responsiveness is such a strong focus of research, and particularly here at the University of Cape Town. And so long before the SDGs were adopted by the UN member states in 2015, at UCT, we were driven by a desire to bring African scholarship and thought leadership to solving the world's wicked problems, which just happened to align very closely with the SDGs. So, and for many universities, we felt that we are well placed here on the continent to focus on these wicked problems because they're literally in our backyards. As African-based researchers, we can help other universities around the world to bridge that divide. And we have, because we have established relationships to work with communities, we don't have to, it's here in our faces. So, for example, at UCT, our campus is in a world-class city, but we have campuses that are just a few kilometers from some of the world's most impoverished communities. In fact, we have outreach and research offices and clinics based in some of those communities, so that we can work alongside the people there to address the problems that they are facing. And here's the thing: in 2015, when I was just about to join UCT, we became a member of the African Research Universities, ARUA, and it's a network of 16 universities in the continent. And it's basically leading research universities on the continent based in 9 different countries, and with a common vision to enhance the quality of research done in South Africa, particularly by Africans. And we felt that if we pool our limited resources together, we can generate a critical mass, and we can work together to collaborate with other researchers outside the continent. And now collaborative, if you look at the areas that we focus on in ARUA, they are all centered around, or they align with the SDGs. And while we do align with the SDGs very closely, for us at UCT, and even at ARUA, when we started with these, deciding on our research focus areas, they were not necessarily informed by SDGs. And for me, that's an important thing. They're rather informed by the needs that we have identified within South Africa and across the continent, and they're a reflection of humanity's needs across the world. As I said, I don't know if I indicated that we did a scoping exercise at UCT when I got here to check how does our research align with the SDGs. And we found that vast parts of UCT research were already making a significant contribution towards the full scope of SDGs without specifically focusing on them. And several of our leading researchers played an important role in advising on the development of SDGs. In fact, I said to our researchers, it looks like we authored the SDGs to align with what we're doing already, but I guess it's because of our location that the problems that we are facing here also happen to be the problems of the world, and so position us better to be a collaborator with others on the continent and elsewhere in the world.
Thank you very much. I mean, brilliant. I think, your thoughts actually create an opening and some window for, maybe I'm going to relate to maybe CBIE and Global Affairs Canada to think about collaborations, strong strategic collaborations, so down the road. Let me now move into Dr. Angel Cabrera, who's the president of Georgia Institute of Technology. And Angel was the co-founder of the University Global Coalition, a global network of universities working in partnership with the United Nations in support of Sustainable Development Goals. He was the chair of the Commission of International Initiatives of the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities when he was the president at George Mason University. And of course, I had a great pleasure of connecting with Angel through that one. Angel, we are not going to ask questions about the state of Georgia and the elections. So I'm going to move on to ask about congratulating you for leading this excellent initiative. What feedback have you received about this coalition that you led? What barriers, such as concerns about academic freedom, have prevented some universities and colleges from joining your group? For institutions that have joined the coalition, what opportunities has this created, and what challenges do they continue to face?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Janica, for your friendship and for the many conversations and experiences that we've had as we've been thinking together about these very important questions. And thank you to Stephen Lewis for his call to act without timidity and to have a clear voice. I'll tell you, I had sort of like an epiphany in 2012 in the spring. I had the incredible honor to participate in the Rio +20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. As you know, it was celebrated 20 years after the legendary Earth Summit to keep stock of what we had accomplished or not. And I was shocked. I was shocked by the fact that universities were nowhere to be seen at this event. So here is the universe coming together to discuss some of the most important issues of our time, and universities don't show up. Now, There were people associated with universities on an individual level, whether we're providing technical advice or sitting on special committees, but institutionally, we were not there. The MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, came and went, and universities still did not have a voice at the table. So when in 2015, we started the cycle again, and we had the world agree on this list of absolutely must-have priorities, I think a bunch of us said, let's not repeat this again. If we have any chance at achieving these goals, it is absolutely essential that those institutions that are in charge of educating the new generations of change agents, of business leaders, of policymakers, they really consider what the responsibility is towards those students. That those of us that command hundreds of millions of dollars in research every year that is put in our hands to answer important questions, that we need to figure out what those important questions are. So there are two things that became very clear. Number one is what we do institutionally, and then number two is what we do together. Now, institutionally, as most of you, organizations of our kind occasionally go through strategic planning. We just did one of those at Georgia Tech. We're in fact announcing our new strategic plan tomorrow. Well, in most of our cases, you try to have a strategic plan that aligns reasonably well with guidelines and direction that you get, whether it's from your government, if you're a public organization, or from other entities. Well, consider the SDGs as the strategic plan for the world. That's how I look at it. I mean, here we have a strategic plan for the world. And fortunately, somebody has gone through the trouble of articulating what those priorities are. Well, if we have that clarity right here, and we go through our own strategic plan, making claims of how fundamental our mission is, and we fail to align with the SDGs, shame on us. So, so that's one of the questions that I think we need to answer to. And Stephen, your call for not being timid is a very good one. Let's call it out. We want to have an impact. Let's align with that. The other thing we need to do is try to figure out, of course, these are very complex goals at the local level, at the regional level, at the global level. How do we band together? And that was the spirit of the coalition. A coalition that didn't start overnight. It was incubated in fun and rich and productive interactions in Canada, in Mexico, with Janica and many other colleagues. It followed up in a memorable and very productive event in Bellagio, Italy, with a group of university leaders and representatives from the UN and others. And what we produced was a very simple University Global Compact. By the way, we had to change compact to coalition because the UN Global Compact didn't appreciate us using those terms. Anyway, go figure. But what we did was we created a commitment. So, signing on to the coalition is as simple as agreeing publicly, as making a public statement that we are committed to using the core functions of a university, our research, our education, our service, and our own processes as examples of and as actors to have an impact in the achievement of the goals. We are coming together not only in terms of sharing a statement that we can band behind, but also to share good best practices, to organize global meetings, to give a platform to the champions within our universities, to share with others what can and should be done to trigger new projects. And these are the early stages of this coalition. By the way, there are other networks, there are other groups. We don't pretend to be the sole place, but we are a good place to collaborate with, a good place to find like-minded champions. And if you have an interest in joining this gang, and we've been blessed with the support not just from the United Nations, but also from the Rockefeller Foundation and from Brookings and from other organizations and alliances of institutions, from the IIE, I guess your counterpart in the US, from the Association of Commonwealth Universities and many others. Join us. Just look us up and join us. You're most welcome. Thank you very much. And merci à tous et à toutes. This has been just a fabulous conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. That was fantastic for giving that the background and then the progress of that one. So I'm now going to move on to Dr. Santa Ohno, the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of British Columbia. Now, Santa was the President and Vice Chancellor since 2016, but also he has lots of leadership roles that he plays, and as the chair of the U15 group of the universities, on various boards and board of directors of Universities Canada. And Santa, I know that you are involved with a number of consortiums, including the University Climate Change Coalition, UC3, the U7 Alliance, and of course, as the chair of the U15 right now, and of course, the Association of Pacific Rim Universities. Now, like Angel's coalition, how do these consortia break down silos in order to promote the transdisciplinary research and education needed to achieve the SDGs?
Thank you very much. First, I want to start by once again thanking Steve and Louis for really inspirational comments, and I hope we can spend some time face-to-face in the near future after the pandemic. And I'd like to say that your call to action is very much appreciated as well. And Angel, thank you so much for your comments and for your leadership. It's very, very, it's a great honor for me to talk about some of these organizations and how they're breaking down those silos. These different organizations are of different ages. The Association of Pacific Rim Universities has been focusing essentially on SDGs for quite some time. As you know, it's a longstanding organization which is focused on research universities around the Pacific Rim, pretty much the entire University of California system, the major universities in Hong Kong, China, and in Japan and Korea, as well as UBC, University of Washington, Caltech. And so it's one of the larger of the organizations that have been focused for some time on these issues. And that organization now is over approximately 60 research universities, and some of the largest and most research intensive have been part of the APRU for quite some time. And they meet on a regular basis at annual meetings. But more important than that, they have research groups that are subsets of those institutions that are focused in many of the areas that are SDGs. So I would say of all the organizations that you've mentioned, that's the one that has been the most organized for approximately at least a decade. So there's lots of results to show from the APRU. And I'd be very happy to share that with anyone that might be interested. Of course, it's focused regionally around the Pacific Rim. And so certainly one of the things that I'd like to say is that connectivity and alignment between these organizations is incredibly important, because achieving a success against, as Stephen said, climate change is going to require all of us, not just the Pacific Rim, or not just the continent of North America, but really will require a global connectivity. But nevertheless, the APRU brings so much because of the strength of the institutions, the billions of dollars in research that are deployed there, and the track record of meaningful research collaboration of over a decade. The other one that you talk about is the UC3 or consortium, which is significantly younger. It was started with a core group of institutions. Janet Napolitano was its first leader. She tapped me to be the second leader of the University Climate Change Coalition. It's basically a North American consortium, primarily heavily weighted onto the West Coast of North America, but also includes other institutions across North America, but it's North America centric. It's hemispheric, if you will. But nevertheless, these are very significant research universities, 26 of them, so a smaller group in North America. It's younger. There have only been 2 summits, but there is a research strategic plan that you can see on the web. There have been convenings of students and faculty, and some projects are already rolling out. I would say the most salient areas of focus right now, there's a commitment that's on the web, like other organizations. But 2 ideas are emerging for focus. One is to identify fellows. It's difficult during the pandemic, but students and postdoctoral fellows to move back and forth between major research centers and in the member institutions to work together. And many of the areas are focused on SDGs. The last thing I'll talk about really briefly, just because of time, is U7+. This is something that Frédéric Millon at Sciences Po, it was his idea with Macron of Paris. And the idea was to focus around the G7. There are 45 institutions. We're meeting in Northwestern in a matter of weeks. And that's a global organization, 45 institutions. There is a commitment that has been signed. It's on the web, and its focus is moving more towards social justice issues, certainly climate change as well. But as you can see, there's overlap, but there's also specificity in each of the organizations. And I think the key moving forward is to connect them. And there's overlap in institutions in each of these networks.
Thank you, Santa. That was wonderful to see that all this, great initiatives happening from all this involvement, your involvement as a leader in these coalitions. Let me now move into Dr. Joy Johnson, who's the President and Vice Chancellor of Simon Fraser University. Prior to her appointment as President, Joy served as SFU's Vice President of Research and International for 6 years, where she oversaw the evolution of cutting-edge research, innovation, international engagement, and of course, quite a bit of great funding for the university. Joy, congratulations. You're a new president, and I believe you're still in your honeymoon period of the presidency. But anyway, my question is that how can we use the SDGs to enlighten and guide research and ensure research to solve the complex challenges facing our world? And I'm going to tie this one with some of the thoughts given by Stephen in some of the areas. And over to you.
Thank you very much, Janica. And I really feel grateful to be part of this panel, learning a lot. I also want to thank Stephen for his call to all of us at universities to speak without timidity. And I think this is very important. As a new president, I have said that 2 of my priorities one is to focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion at my university, very much aligned with the SDGs, gender equality, but also to be thinking about our commitments to reconciliation and indigenization at our university. There's so much I'd like to say, but let me begin by saying that I do believe that universities play a key role, and I think that I'm looking for ways for Simon Fraser University to think about the role it can play, a more meaningful role in relation to the SDGs. I really want to applaud my colleague from UCT for reaching out her hand and indicating that she's wanting to work in partnership. I do believe that universities in the global north have much to learn from the global south. And this is an opportunity for us not to lead, but to also learn. And this reciprocal learning is going to be essential. I also think that there's an opportunity for us to think about universities as an instrument for change, not only in terms of our research, but in terms of our infrastructure. How do we use our hiring practices? How do we think about our universities and the ways that we can reduce our footprint on our communities? How do we use our research capacities, for example, to work with communities that are struggling locally? I think about the fact that my university is situated close to one of the poorest postal codes in Canada. And so while we think about what's happening obviously in terms of challenges in the global south, we also need to be thinking about the SDGs and our work that we need to do here in Canada as well. I want to just also make mention of the recent work of the Times Higher Education and their work on trying to encourage universities to think about impact rankings. And what's interesting to me, I think it's been very controversial. People talked about the challenge and concerns about monetizing the SDGs for impact rankings. And we at SFU didn't participate in the first round of that impact ranking because we were concerned about it. And I think it's an interesting thing to have a conversation about. But we did collect the data in the first round. And what we found was that it provided us an opportunity to call ourselves into account, to lift up a mirror to ourselves and ask ourselves the question, how are we contributing to the SDGs? And that really has been very helpful to us in terms of understanding the work we're doing and the work we need to do. I think we were surprised by how much work across our university, in corners of our university, we weren't necessarily thinking about. Our facilities planning, for example, the work that we're doing in terms of some of our educational programming, how it aligns, that work aligns with the SDGs. So I think there is some truth in the statement that what gets measured gets done sometimes. And so part of what I think universities also need to do is to hold themselves to account. I think to Stephen's point as well, to focus on a few key areas where we can make a difference and to really drive that work forward, be that climate change, be that poverty, be that thinking about ways in which we can increase educational opportunities for those who might not have access to education. So certainly right now at Simon Fraser University, and we're seeing this with many universities, and I love this idea of the SDGs being a strategic plan for the planet. I think that there are so many opportunities for alignment and for thinking about ways that we can together move this work forward. So I'll leave it there because I'm interested in furthering the dialogue with others.
Thanks, Joy, and thank you for touching the Indigenous and the EDI perspective and the infrastructure aspect as well. So now I'm moving to Don Bureau, the president of Nova Scotia Community College, and Don has been the president since 2011. And Don's commitment to adult education spans over 2 decades, working with the adult learners at colleges and universities, as well as professional designation granting organizations across Canada and internationally. So, Don, how can we incorporate the SDGs in our organizational measure of success? And Joy touched upon on the accountability side as well, to make our institutional accountable to them.
Again, what a great question. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. And I too, Stephen, so enjoyed your comments. I had the honor of meeting you, Stephen, 10 years ago when you were in Nova Scotia and Halifax presenting at a conference that we were hosting for the Canadian colleges and institutes. And for those of you on the call today, Halifax, Nova Scotia, of course, is on the east coast of Canada. And Stephen's remarks 10 years ago were just as inspiring as today. So Stephen, nice to see you again, and thank you for your continued work. You know, I have the honor today of being on this panel with colleagues from the post-secondary sector. I represent the college and institutes sector of the post-secondary sector, and it's an interesting kind of group because in Canada, at least, 95% of the Canadian population lives within a half an hour's drive of a college or an institute. And together with our university partners, I think that kind of geographical coverage gives us great potential to have a big impact. And so when we look at the SDGs at our institution, quite frankly, our view has been changing recently. And it's been changing recently because of some of the things that you spoke about, Stephen. And for us, it's the construct of 5 crises that are kind of intersecting right now. So the intersectionality of 5 crises in the world, and how can we as an institution, and quite frankly, the colleges across Canada, respond to those 5 crises. So what are they? And they're nothing, I don't think, new to anybody in this conversation today. The first, obviously, is the global health crisis that we're faced with right now. And the numbers are daunting. Looking at the stats this morning, between December and March of earlier this year, that 3-month period saw 300,000 cases of COVID identified around the world. Well, folks, in the past 12 hours, we've seen globally 300,000 cases of COVID emerge around the world. So just absolutely a global pandemic. Number two, we're in the midst of an economic crisis. Again, our province, our country, the world is facing such economic pressure right now that we haven't seen probably in a lifetime. Number three is a social crisis. Again, Stephen, you spoke about this, the inequities, the access difficulties that particular vulnerable communities are having in the world right now is being magnified with this intersectionality of crises. But, you know, I think it goes beyond that. I think there's a degree of loneliness and abandonment in the world right now that people are facing and being magnified with some of the other crises. We have 1,000 friends on Facebook, but not one good friend you can call at a time when there's being hit by a crisis. Number four, you talked about it in terms of a climate crisis. And again, I would agree with you. That is an existential threat that we face as a globe right now. And again, the intersectionality with all of these creates a particular issue. But the fifth one is one that we're finding quite interesting as an institution, one that's very closely connected, again, like my peers on this conference today. And that fifth one is a crisis of hope. We're seeing a large degree of people suffering despair because of what's been happening the past 9 months. They're not hopeful for the future. They're feeling scared, a high level of anxiety. Matched with that is this crisis as a crisis of trust and a crisis of truth. They're being told not to trust certain pillars of society. Don't trust elections. Don't trust certain types of fountains of evidence and data. So when you bring all those five crises together, I ask myself, as an institution of higher learning, how can we be an antidote? How can we be an antidote to those five crises? And I'm realizing more and more that the 17 SDGs provide us with a perfect framework. I do love the notion of it being a strategic plan for the world, but I also agree that it can be a plan for us institutionally to ask ourselves, how can we be the antidote to those obviously five crises, but obviously, and more important, the fifth one, a crisis of hope. And I think that provides a perfect framework for us to provide a model, a framework of vocabulary to be that antidote of trust. You know, as a leader of a college, I'm very proud of the role that we play in society to democratize post-secondary education, to work with our university partners to provide even more opportunities for access for people to pursue higher learning. And if that's done within that common vocabulary, that common framework, it allows us to allow for our students to kind of flow back and forth between our institutions, to kind of bundle the education that they need to be successful in that world of tomorrow. I'll just finish off by saying that yes, Steve, and I agree that students are kind of our most powerful kind of tool that we can use to affect change in the world. But you know, when you affect the difference in a student's life, you make a difference in the family in which they come from. And if you affect the difference in families' lives, you affect the difference in communities. If you change communities, you change nations. So I think your call to action is so important right now. But let's look at the maximizing and leveraging impact of that we can have as post-secondary institutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. It's wonderful to see that you put those five crises and then connecting it with the framework. Now I'm going to ask Larissa, because it's 9:57, so I was thinking whether we should maybe take about another 10 minutes to go through that. Would that be okay, Larissa?
Absolutely. I know we have a couple key questions that we want to pick up on, Janica.
So,
please do.
Thank you, Larissa. So, Stephen, I'm going to fantastic talk, very inspiring, and I'm going to just ask you a question came from the chat. So, how do we address that funders of universities are often companies that have a vested interest in not addressing climate change? Should universities not accept funding and run the risk of not being able to support operations and provide education to many students?
Well, if universities are dependent on fossil fuel producers, then universities should go out of business. I would think that you should not. I mean, this is I will admit to you, it's a socialist and fundamentalist view and I admit it openly, I would not be accepting money from those who have exacerbated the continent the world in a way that that may lead to ultimate devastation. You don't take money from those people. You spend your time being critics of them. And for the major oil companies that are now undergoing a religious conversion and they're suddenly embracing renewables, I would be very, very cautious about the underlying motivation and what is really at work. And there's a lot of documentation and material on that. So surely universities are being starved by governments, not by corporations. Surely universities can exert the power to extract more funding from where it should come. The governments who depend on the universities for their intellectual capacity.
Thank you, Stephen. It's wonderful. So let me now put an open question to the panelists. So how can universities and colleges act as the connecting entity to encourage and facilitate the cross-sectorial engagement between all stakeholders, including the governments, the private sector, small and medium enterprises, and higher education, necessary to achieve the SDGs? So I'm going to keep it open, and I'd love to see that who's going to take this question from as an open one. Joy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I'll keep my remark brief, but I do believe that universities can serve the role as a public square for these kinds of discussions, a convener. Universities have a tradition of thinking about things from a multidisciplinary perspective, but we also have capacities to engage our communities and to work closely with them. I think that, and to have critical conversations, to ask important questions, to call into question certain power structures. So I do think that our convening power is powerful, and that in my view, that is the key in terms of moving forward and creating these connections.
Mama Hiti, do you have any comment on?
Yeah, and we are a safe space. I mean, universities are a safe space for ideas. And so we are the best place, I think, to convene people from different spaces in our society to discuss these important issues. It's not like other places that are perhaps committed to one ideology or one way of doing things. So I think and we are also a place of we are well positioned to disrupt ways of thinking that are entrenched in society or in particular contexts. So they make it, that I think makes us the best place or the best conveners for these conversations. Thank you.
Janaka, if I may, and I couldn't agree more with Mount Getty and with Joy. And I would say that not only universities can be the conveners, we have to be. We play a role that no one else can play. Listen, if you followed, and Janaka made a tongue-in-cheek comment to politics in the US and in Georgia these days, everything is politicized. You cannot ask someone how's the weather today without being thrown into some sort of political controversy. It is essential in this environment that we protect with everything we can our ability to be that forum of dialogue, of conversation, of discussion, of ideas, of seeking truth is essential. It's not easy, and anybody who has had my job for at least a couple of years will show you their scars. I have plenty of them on the left, and I have plenty of them on the right. And if you're accumulating those scars, kudos to you. You're doing a good job. And by the way, in that convening power, I would say, and Stephen, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'll offer an alternative view. I don't think we can leave out anybody in this convening, including those who have and play an active role in extracting and utilizing fossil fuels. They have to be at the conversation. And by the way, if they want to share their money with me, instead of drilling another well, they want to give me the money, to do good research and offer scholarships for the next change agents, bring it on.
Angel, you're walking down the path to self-destruction, but you're such an amiable fellow, I can't resist it.
That was interesting. So Santa and Don, please.
Yeah, I think what was at the core of the question, I may be mistaken, was that there are two sectors, or there's the college and technical school sector, and there's the research university sector. And I think that's the core of the question, and that exists universally. I work primarily at AAU universities when I was south of the border, and I'm the chair of the U15 in Canada. And so I think that the question is very insightful and appropriate. I think that it's usually the case that the approach is too fragmented on whatever nation we're talking about, and that the research universities and the colleges do not meet frequently enough. They're not on the same page. And as was mentioned, it really requires everyone, as Angel said. And so what has to change is that there has to be, instead of having research universities approach the government or the community separately from the colleges, there needs to be much more dialogue. This is an emergency, and we all have to be together and aligned. Just as I said, there needs to be alignment between the organizations and connectivity. Time is of the essence that we're all on the same page, the research universities as well as the colleges. I think that's what the question was.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Don, also in terms of looking at from the college sector as well, I thought.
Look, I love the notion and the role that we can play as conveners, and I want to add on top of that, how do we get conversations not only happening at the board table, but also at the kitchen table? This is a part of a movement that we need, and if you think of successful movements in the world, the conversation is happening not only in a centralized location, but it's happening in a distributed model. So that would be my question. How do we affect the dialogue in the home, at the bus stop, and the restaurant to include conversations like this?
Okay, thank you very much to everyone. And so what I think, with the time, Larissa, I was wondering whether we should close this one right now, or would you?
Well, I wanted to maybe pick up one final question. And, Stephen, as you were closing, you picked up on the whole piece about students, those future stewards, the ones with the zeal, the ones who have that just irresistible desire to have an impact in the world. And I would just be interested, even if it's a 10-second comment from each of our panelists, how do we do that? How do we, I know that we have the space, and the capacity with our institutions, but what does that look like in tangible ways? And how do we advance that and really help to build those connections where you're not just dealing kind of with singular students that are learning and who are being kind of shaped and inspired in our learning environments, but how do we facilitate and promote that kind of connection, so such that there is that multiplier effect? I would just welcome final comments.
Can I say for us at UCT, we have several university-wide initiatives, and the latest one, Sustainable Campus Initiative, is a call for proposals, but the requirement is that it should be a collaboration between students, workers, academics, so non-academics and academic workers. And it's the first time that we are having a call that does that. But we're doing that because we want our students to be involved, not only as activists, because there's activist movements around sustainability on campus, but we want them to be involved in doing something, working collaboratively with our researchers, our academics, but also our cleaners, our gardeners, our secretaries, and so on. So we've been accepting proposals for that, and we want to see how this is the well-funded Vice Chancellor Strategic Initiative. We want to see how that will take the campus on a journey together, rather than do something for students with academics and others. We want the whole campus to be in with the message of sustainability, and not only that we produce high quality research, but also in how we live and do our work on campus, whatever level or position we have.
Any other last minute thoughts from our colleagues from?
Everyone?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, I think that's a terrific initiative. And I think, again, we've got so much to learn. I would just say our students are change makers, and they are demanding that we think about these learning opportunities. And so I have no doubt that universities are going to have to heed that demand and think about how we create these amazing learning experiences that really can make a difference in the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So with that, I want to actually say that really want to thank Stephen and the panelists for your valuable time sharing your thoughts and experience for our CBIE community. And I want to mention that Julio Sevilla from Concordia University, Meghna Ramaswamy from University of Saskatchewan, and Carol Sachs from Simon Fraser University, on behalf of the International Relations of Professional Learning Community of CBIE, has presented a report on activities and initiatives adopted by the higher education institutions in Canada to advance the UN's SDGs. They have input from about 10 universities. Let me take one extract from that. So higher education institutions have the ability to shape the international agenda and drive collective action to achieve global peace and prosperity. However, realizing such a vision requires systematic transformation and holistic whole of institutional approach, where education, stakeholders, partners, and learners work together to construct a common vision of sustainability with sustainable development goals as endpoints. By embedding, integrating, and implementing SDGs in an institutional core operations and plans, decision-making and policies, research, teaching, learning, and governance, higher education institutions can become a powerhouses for sustainable transformation. So this concludes our panel discussion. Thanks to everyone, and please stay safe and healthy and enjoy the rest of the conference.
And I'm just wondering, Janica, perhaps as a final parting word, Stephen, we've absolutely treasured the time with you and each and every one of our panelists. I can only echo Janica's comments, but I wanted to give you the final parting words before we kind of transition to the next part of the conference program. So over to you, Stephen.
That's very kind of you. I must say, I've learned a great deal. I actually had no idea about UC3 or U7+. I'm fascinated by much of the conversation. I have to get in touch with Angel after this is over and suggest that we have a duel at 30 or 40 paces. I really appreciated the discussion immensely, and in fact, learned a great deal. And this business about collaboration is really at the heart of it. I'm in love with the African continent. I've traveled back and forth from the continent for over 60 years, believe it or not. And there is tremendous, I mean, I'm only familiar with it, but the tremendous sophistication at the university level, particularly in a country like South Africa. And the idea of collaboration, both students and faculty, on these important human issues is an elixir to the soul. So that's my view of hope, Dawn, as I define it. Thanks, everybody. You've been lovely to participate on this panel.
Okay, thanks everyone. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And just a final few announcements as we transition to the next parts of the program. Just a reminder to all of you to join us at 4 p.m. for the Excellence Awards to celebrate our colleagues who have made a really significant contribution to international education. And following that, we will have a virtual gala, the first of its kind, with entertainment by the All-Star City Band from Winnipeg. Some of you might remember them from our Winnipeg conference last year. And tomorrow morning, I know the hotly anticipated immigration update sessions with our colleagues from IRCC. This year, for the first time at the conference, we'll be offering those as 2 separate sessions, one in English, one in French. The French session will be at 9:45 and the English session will begin at 11 a.m. Eastern. With that, we wrap things up. Thank you so much to each and every one of our panelists and contributors. And Stephen, it was just a great joy to include you in this conversation. And I'll invite you just to stay for one moment so we can snap a photo of our panel for posterity's sake, and look forward to seeing where this work with our institutions takes us in the days and weeks to come. Thank you, everyone.